Okay, let's actually look at why there are so few atheist women and what the research says about it. I don't know who made this video or how reputable it is, but we're just gonna dive in. We're just gonna do it, bruh. Skrrt. Sorry, it's fine. Okay.
The Olympic Games in Paris. But did you know that until recently, women were not allowed to participate in the Olympic Games? It only became possible in the 20th century in Paris, and even then, women made up less than 3% of the participants and could only compete in 5 sports. In their book, Marta Cibatkowska and Steve Bruce explain why men are more likely than women to reject religion or become atheists. And there are good reasons for this. Hi everyone, this is Religiolog, and in this video I'll explain why women tend to be more religious than men. Multiple studies demonstrate that religion is declining in some regions of the world. But here is the thing, this secularization process affects men more than women. So why is that? For example, studies show that women are more likely than men to pray, attend worship, and say that their faith is important to them. Women also dominate the world of New Age spirituality and are more superstitious than men. But why is this the case? Is it due to biological, psychological, or social differences? If you follow my videos, you know I'm planning a video about the history of atheist women. But before that, I'd like to briefly review why it's often harder for women to be secular. And stay tuned, because soon I'll share an amazing story about a woman who had a major impact on European and world history. I'm sure most of you have never heard of her, but she did something very significant and affected the history of secularism and atheism. One of the main takeaways from this study is that the gender gap among atheists around the world is not so much the result of biological differences. It may not even be directly related to religion itself. In fact, it's because of important social differences that overlap and reinforce each other.
I agree.
Studies repeatedly show that non-religious and atheist people often have better social standing. They're usually well-educated, higher-income males, primarily white. In other words,
that's interesting. I haven't looked into that. If that's true, I'm like, that has me wondering where, maybe I just haven't been looking very much, but I would like to see more people, I guess, in power. Now I'm sounding like I'm pro-establishment, but I'm not. I'd like to see more people in power kind of express atheism. So that's interesting. I didn't know about that.
These are individuals who don't suffer oppression and don't need the support that religion or religious communities often provide. But it's not just that. Tina Mahlamaki explains that there are several theories about why more men are atheists than women. Some of these theories are shown on the screen, but they have serious flaws. As I mentioned earlier, studies show that atheists often enjoy a privileged status in society. So no surprise, they are usually white, educated, and men with good
I see.
income.
I think I misinterpreted. The point he's making is that they're privileged and have more access to education, not so much that they're like people in power. I would, that's an interesting point actually. I actually totally see how that could make sense. How the more privilege you have, the more education you have, the more, also not just the more education you have, but the less stress you have just to exist in your life. I talk about this in the video I released on YouTube today actually, which is that when people are in the leisure class and they have more time on their hands, they're more open to think about their place in the universe and what it means to be alive and all of those capital B big questions. Whereas if you're kind of more on the spectrum towards survival mode and you have to spend all of your time and energy putting food on the table, like you're not going to give a fuck if there's a God, you know, it doesn't matter as much what your like authentic moral values are at the end of the day, because, and that's like a really unfortunate side effect of the inequality in society, is like it keeps people from experiencing the joy of like these really deep personal transformations of realizing who you really are. A lot of people don't get to that in their life. And I've been told a lot from, this is really frustrating to me. I get this I got this conversation a lot when I was kind of still more on the spiritual but not religious side of the world, where again, the loudest voices in that field too are men, and they talk a lot about how like some people just never want to look inward. Maybe it's not fair to say it was just men, but a lot of people will say, whatever. A lot of people will say that some people just don't want to do the inner work and look inwards and question, you know, the big questions and all this stuff. And it's like, maybe they don't have fucking time and energy to worry about whether or not what they really think about. And honestly, that's why I have such a problem with like Christianity, because it perpetuates so much fear and anxiety about secularism and progress in the world. These poor Christians are hearing these messages from the pulpit, and they're internalizing this fear of not just like shit going on earth, but like the fear of hell. And so it doesn't really open up their framework, their way of thinking, to allow for authentic internal questioning and critical thinking and skepticism and all of the things that, yeah, when you're privileged and I guess, white and educated and you have all this time on your hands, you can finally get to a point where you're like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe. These are my moral values. And yeah, exactly. Maslow's hierarchy states that you kind of need all of the basics taken care of before you can self-actualize. And so it's so disheartening to see how the Christian population are told all of these lies and this bullshit, and they're never able to kind of break out of it. But I don't think it's like, I don't think it's a detriment. I don't think it's a fault on the part of the everyday person. I think that these institutions want to keep them like this. So that was an interesting point in this video. Let's see what else it has to say.
In other words,
oh, let's watch later the Jubilee video with Sam. Yeah, I actually, okay, I'm glad you want to do that, because I haven't watched it yet, and I almost thought about doing it on this stream. So, okay, thank you for that. All right.
They aren't held back by economic or social factors. That's why education is important in this context. Scholars found a strong correlation between privilege, status, gender, and education. Historically, women have had less access to education than men, and studies show that more educated women are generally less religious. Just think about it. Until recently, women didn't have the right to vote in elections or participate fully in political life. For example, in Switzerland, women could not vote until 1971. Until not long ago, women didn't have the right to enter universities, and it was believed that their brains were simply not capable of mastering mathematics and philosophy. That's why would they need an education? Women could not even ride bicycles or dine in restaurants without a male companion, and all property belonged to their husbands. The famous atheist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who wrote a very anti-religious book, The Women's Bible, shared how she was surprised when, as a 10-year-old girl, she received a beautiful necklace for Christmas. Stanton was the daughter of a wealthy congressman and judge in New York, and they were visited by a lawyer who was her father's friend. So this lawyer told her, you know what, when you grow up, your husband will own this necklace. She said, no way, it was my gift. To what he replied, you don't understand, but it's the law. When you get married, you cease to exist in the eyes of the law. And this situation stayed in the little girl's mind, and she would later become one of the most influential advocates for women's rights and staunch critic of religion. Just imagine if your parents give you a golden ring or necklace for your birthday, let's say, but according to the law, it would belong to your husband. Women also couldn't open a bank account. In the US, women only gained this right in the 1960s, and many banks still required a husband's signature.
Boo.
Women couldn't practice law or file lawsuit for divorce or sexual harassment. They were also excluded from serving as jurors. For instance, in Florida, only men could serve as jurors until 1961. Also, until the 1920s in the US, married women were not allowed to have a personal passport. The list of restrictions could go on, but the main point is clear. Being a woman meant and still mean facing many limitations on rights and opportunities. And before I return to the work of Tina Mahlamaki and the research of Chebetkovskaya and Bruce, let me share the story of an amazing woman I promised you earlier. I'm sure many of you have never heard of her. That's Clémence Royer, who is renowned for translating Darwin's work into French. She was French, born in 1830. Darwin published On the Origin of Species in late 1859, and Royer translated it into French in 1862. And this was the first time most French people heard about Darwin. Jennifer Hecht explains in her book The End of the Soul that anthropology began in France with a group of atheists, who later decided to establish the field, and they were partially inspired by Clémence Royer and her interpretation of Darwinism, as well as the brain studies of Paul Broca. Hecht also notes that American anthropologists drew inspiration from the French school, which was significantly influenced by Royer. So what she did was remarkable. She not only added a lengthy preface, but also numerous footnotes to her translation of Darwin. While Darwin himself doesn't talk much about humans, in his book he talks mostly about birds, and only briefly mentioning humans in the last chapter, but Royer wrote a 37-page
That is such a hard read. I tried getting through it, and I almost didn't. Or actually, I don't know if I finished it. So just throwing that out there.
Introduction. And in this introduction, she almost directly implies that ideas of Darwin support atheism. Her whole emphasis was not on the evolution of birds, but on human evolution, and that this proves that religion is meaningless. As a result, people who read Darwin's book in French saw this book through this clearly anti-religious lens, almost as if it were propaganda for atheism. Hecht explains that reading the book
there's not even non-specifically theological books always being used as propaganda for Christianity or some other religion or this and that. Like, goddess forbid, one book promotes atheism. Good goddess.
English.
Thank you, Apostate Nate. There are not enough resources produced by everyday people who defect from the church. This channel is very important. Thank you.
Was a very different experience. Yes, maybe some English readers might think, hold on, if birds developed according to such laws, what does this say about us, humans? Or what does this say about the biblical stories of creation and etc.? But they aren't explicitly guided to these conclusions. But French readers could not avoid it. From the very beginning, they were told if Darwin is right, then the biblical stories of creation and the fall of man make no sense, and that this proves that Christianity is a lie. And this way, Rayer, in her anti-clerical introduction, portrayed Darwin as a new champion of free thought who challenged Christian doctrines. So anthropology in France was built on an atheistic and anti-clerical foundation. And although many anthropologists were initially opposed to including women in their society, Paul Broca permitted Clémence Royer to join. She once remarked, "I don't want to give a penny to the priests, but I want my body to be cared for by scientists when I die."
I was talking to someone yesterday about how the institution of science has been yet another institution that has been unfair to a large portion of the human race. Now, as an atheist, I love science. I love reading about science. I love learning about science. And again, if you guys can't tell, I'm a bit anti-establishment. And I think it's important to make a distinction between science, the process, because science is not a set of beliefs. It is a process of determining lowercase t truths about the reality we live in, right? But the institution of science, the people who have historically been accepted as scientific authorities, has, just like any other institution, kept a lot of other. It was a white male institution, just like everything else for the longest time, because again, that's just how patriarchy was set up. And, times are changing, times are done with that. But, women weren't as recognized as scientific figures for the longest time. Like, I think Albert Einstein's wife helped and actually assisted in a legitimate way in his research and got no credit. There are so many women who have had to, use a man's name to get her work published. Women weren't allowed in all of these educational institutions to become scientists. And of course, the same thing for people of color and Black Americans here in the United States. Of course, it's been through all cultures throughout time, though, that a lot of in patriarchy in the last thousands of years, women were not as respected in the institution of scientific discovery and practice, right? And now we're seeing as a result, a lot of there studies have been published that show that men are taken more seriously when they visit the doctor, and scientists didn't understand anything about the woman's anatomy for the longest time. And so I do also scientific authorities, not science as a concept, but scientific authorities right alongside biblical authorities were used to justify the African slave trade, saying that biologically speaking, Africans are supposed to be in servitude, right? And scientific authorities alongside biblical authorities have been used to subjugate women and villainize the LGBTQ community and all of this stuff. So this this person here, like, is just another example of the limitations of being a woman in a field that has been dominated by men for so long. And yes, the beauty of science is that it will always change with new facts. Like, the difference between, again, the concept of science is like, it's not even apples and oranges versus science and religion. It's like apples and fucking eggs, right? Science is so far beyond a better way to approach this reality we live in, because it does not make a capital T truth claim. It actually functions as a way to try and find what things are not first. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a process of elimination in the scientific experiment to determine what the ways in which this world actually operates. And I believe the majority of college students are women now. You're right. Yeah, that's true. And that's great. Finally. Sorry. No, but it's just, it's part of the equalizing. But it was not that way for so long. Like, I'm not surprised. Like, now we're all like, oh my gosh, we got to be educated. We got to be educated, bro. So yeah. Thanks for that.
This reflected her commitment to science. Despite church opposition in the 1870s, this group of anthropologists founded the Society of Mutual Autopsy. They agreed to donate their bodies after they die for research to study the relationship between the brain and the body. And to this day in France, you can visit and view the brains of many of these scientists. But why am I telling you all this? First of all, it's a fascinating story, and I think is worth knowing. And I'd be very happy if you could leave a like and a comment below, especially if this is the first time you've heard it. The second reason is that back then, many people, including women, believed that the female brain was inferior to the male brain, that it was somehow underdeveloped. And unfortunately, many women, including Royer herself, thought so too. She even believed that she was born with a man's brain. And I hope you can see why this is problematic. As the authors of this book show, this is not a biological or gender issue, but a social one. We are products of our social environment, so we use what is available to us. But even in different regions of the world, we work to eliminate patriarchal attitudes that have persisted for thousands of years.
Remember when Christian fundamentalism produced penicillin, microprocessors, and cell phones? Me neither. That's good. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah, it's hilarious when, like, people are self-proclaimed science deniers on, like, a panel where they're, like, representing science deniers, and they drove there. Like, cool. You got there from your scienceless vehicle. That's super interesting.
And provide women with more rights and opportunities so they don't risk their social status or social capital if they decide to go against the established religious traditions and expectations. Perhaps they will make different choices. After all, Clémence Royer certainly left her mark on French history. As Hecht argues, the separation of church and state in France in 1905 was partially due to the efforts of Royer and many other non-religious women of that time. But let's return to Tina Machlamyaki, who also points to the importance of socialization. Just as women are often taught to be more submissive, passive, and obedient, they are also taught to be more religious. Therefore, women's higher religiosity is often linked to their traditional roles, because women are expected to care for others, raise children, uphold traditions, and care for the sick and dying. That's why they are more likely to confront existential questions like life, death, and the divine. Machlamyaki also explains that research shows a strong link between gender orientation and religiosity. It seems that masculinity and femininity play a big role in whether people are religious.
I also think that because women historically were the main caretakers of children, they were not only confronted with more of the existential questions because they give birth and were caretakers of people when they die, but because they had to essentially raise children on their own. I have seen how a lot of women kind of fall into religion so easily because it kind of gives them this rule book on how to raise their kid in a good way. Because when you leave religion, you kind of have to build that on your own. Like, oh, how do we instill moral values? How do we teach them to be kind? All of these things. So it's like super religious women may have these pure intentions when they want to raise their kids religiously. But, obviously it's a little bit more authentic and less demonizing, less disempowering, all of the things when we kind of establish that outside of religion. But these are really interesting points.
Masculine traits like aggressiveness, logic, and competitiveness are associated with secular beliefs, while feminine traits like caring, gentleness, submissiveness, and community building are associated with religious beliefs. But please feel the difference. As Mahlamaki explains, in some studies, the gender difference in religiousness is explained by risk preferences. Men or masculine people are more likely to commit crimes, behave violently, drive at high speed, hunt large and dangerous animals, and so on. According to these studies, non-religiosity and rejecting God are part of typically masculine risk-taking behavior. But these assumptions are likely incorrect, because scholars like Edgell, Frost, and Stewart, who developed the risk preference approach, argue that it's social risk, not existential risk, that explains why non-religion, and especially atheism, are more socially risky for women and other marginalized groups. Let me repeat it again. It's important to distinguish between existential risk and social risk. These scholars argue that when men and women make similarly socially stigmatized choices, women face greater risk than men do for the same choices. In other words, women are more likely to suffer social consequences for adopting non-religious belief, identities, and practices. We see this especially in the United States, where religiosity, national identity, and civic virtue are closely linked. Atheists.
And everyone needs a village, right? And so we're talking about how we're trying to establish communities outside of organized religion, but yeah, no, this is a really good point because, say there's a single mother raising her kid. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of government mandated social protections for her in every single case. So there are plenty of nonprofits and programs to help her out. But a lot of single mothers can rely on churches if they're involved in the church. The church that I grew up in had a single mothers program of some kind where they would get groceries and help with carpools and stuff like that. But that's another interesting point.
In the US often face discrimination, dislike, and distrust, so leaving religion can be socially risky. If you'd like to learn more about this, watch my video where I talk about 10 ways atheists are discriminated against in the US. The link will be in the description. Anyway, what we find is that in general, women are more likely to bear the social cost of stigmatized non-religious choices, because atheism is seen as violating gender expectations that women should be moral, nurturing, and religious. Men, on the other hand, don't face the same risks. No one is going to question a man's masculinity or say, hey, you are not a real man if you reject religion. But for women, it's different. Plus, men who choose atheism often come from more privileged position, like a better education, which helps them avoid stigma and social exclusion. In one of my next videos, you'll see that historically the most famous female atheists were also privileged. They were white, more educated, and wealthier. Yes, it was extremely hard for them when they paved the way for other women in the free thought movement. They were at the forefront of the fight against patriarchy and sexism for many years. Annie Laurie Gaylor's book, Women Without Superstition, tells the stories of many of these non-believing women and their fight for equality. But we also understand that for women of color, or for women without access to education, or for those with fewer resources, they have had even greater difficulties. Many studies show that even today, secular women are still often marginalized and stigmatized, sometimes even within secular or atheist organizations. Dr. Günther of the University of California argues that secular women are less likely to join organized atheism because they feel stigmatized even within these communities. In her article, she
Tax all religions, 100% agree. Stigmatize slut versus stud that I talked about in one of my vids. I don't know if I talked about that in one of my videos. I mean, I know the point that you're making. Like when there's a promiscuous man, he's celebrated, and when there's a promiscuous woman, she's devalued, right? But I don't think that was me who mentioned slut versus stud, but I see your point and resonate.
Discusses how women and non-binary individuals report inequality between secular movements and instances of sexual and gender-based harassment. It's therefore not surprising that in the general culture, atheist communities are often perceived as clubs for angry men who make an effort.
That's actually hilarious.
In recent years, we see that many non-religious or secular organizations put efforts to demonstrate
clubs of angry men.
Explain that many women are repelled by the dogmatic and oppressive messaging present in new atheist communities.
Yes, that's another thing that's another reason I call myself a spiritual atheist, because there's kind of a pitfall that atheist culture can really fall into, like relying so much on rationalism and reason and science and law. Like it can become dogmatic, It can just be a replacement for the religion you left behind in a lot of cases. And I've seen that happen. And unfortunately, my theory on this is that because society teaches men that they can't show their emotions as much as women can, that they can't be as vulnerable, like men's emotional intelligence is not always as developed as women's. And so when men start to align with atheism, they can fall into this like, no, it's logic and reason only, and it's only the left side of the brain and all of this stuff, because that's kind of what they were conditioned to value above interconnectedness and community and emotional intelligence and all of this stuff. And so that's another reason that I would say that atheist culture does not have as many women in it, because we women are conditioned to prioritize our emotional wellness. And if all we're hearing is that nothing exists and nothing matters, and like, a lot of the traps of rationalism, like we're not going to feel represented. So that's a really good point. I'm glad this video brought it up.
Groups often have primarily male membership. But in any case, we see that women often have to hide their atheist beliefs because they fear the social consequences. A real fighter describes this as living in a heretical closet, from which women are afraid to come out and openly declare their unbelief. They fear the potential stigma and isolation if others find out that they're atheists. So it's not surprising that Shepetkovska and Bruce found that in those societies where the lives of men and women become more similar, the gender gap in religiosity decreases, while religious indifference tends to increase. Consider this article from USA Today. It quotes Daniel Cox, who says that men have always been
love animism
across different cultures and classes. But recently, studies show that this trend is changing. More and more young women are leaving religion. Ryan Burge has noticed this change too. Since 2012, the number of young women
Really? What happened? Oh.
defined as agnostic, atheist, or nothing.
Is it still gone? I wonder why. Okay. Tell me if it doesn't work still.
Up to and even surpassing the number of young men in these categories. Data from a study and a 2023 survey revealed that among baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials, men constituted 54 to 57% of those who left their childhood faith.
Wait. Okay, yeah. I was gonna say this isn't what just hearing. Really? No. Hold on. What's going on? Oh, okay. I see. I think this should work now. Let me go back because this is a good point.
Women across different cultures and classes. But recently, studies show that this trend is changing. More and more young women are leaving religion. Ryan Burge has noticed this change too. Since 2012, the number of young women identifying as agnostic, atheist, or nothing in particular has been catching up to even surpassing the number of young men in these categories. Data from a study and a 2023 survey revealed that among baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials, men constituted 54 to 57% of those who left their childhood faith. But among Gen Zs, the pattern has flipped. 54% of those who left the church were female. More and more women are questioning why they...
Yeah, so this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, if you were here, and also in the video I released today on YouTube, which is that not only are more women leaving organized religion than ever before, but also Gen Z is like the least religiously affiliated generation like in history. And there's so many reasons for this, but... so this video is interesting. I wonder if the point it's making aligns with kind of the idea that a lot of women are leaving, a lot more Gen Z women are leaving the Christian faith, but not as many of them are turning directly to atheism, or it's just taking them a longer time to get there, kind of like myself, because... Again, for all of the reasons I was kind of outlining in atheist culture, right? Like maybe there's not as much representation. And also, I think that one thing that atheism culture kind of misses out on is remembering to talk about things that matter to femininity because of social conditioning, such as connection to our bodies, connection to, you know, each other, and all of this stuff. And I mean, maybe this is an unfair assessment. It's just kind of my perspective of the very surface level consumption of atheist content creation I've kind of gathered. Did your church require tithing? Yes, it did. Yeah. So I grew up in an evangelical fundamentalist non-denominational megachurch. And so I always said that our denomination was money because they had a lot of our money. Yeah.
They should stay in churches that promotes patriarchy and where their opinion don't matter. Ryan Birch also points out that women often do most of the work that keeps churches running. They volunteer, help out, and get their families involved in religious activities. Shayla Gregory, who has studied Christian marriages for 17 years, says that without women, churches would struggle to survive.
So true.
Also, a study published in the Journal of Religion and Demography, which focuses on Russian demographics, reports the same pattern. There is a significant gender religiosity gap in older generations, with women being more religious than men. But among younger cohorts in Russia, this gender religiosity gap is closing. I also recommend these books. They show the correlation between women's emancipation, the preference for individual choice norms, and the decline of religiosity. And if anyone is interested, my channel has a review of these books. The authors emphasize that for centuries, most major religions encourage women to stay at home, have as many children as possible, and discourage divorce, abortion, homosexuality, contraception, and any sexual behavior not related to reproduction. Women were always housewives, but now things are changing. Women are demanding equal rights with men, wanting to vote and even run for office. What for, women? Why do you need power?
Male Rights USA, where did you go? What, isn't this your shtick? Isn't this your thing? Don't you want to talk?
And these norms were necessary for the survival of societies, because in the past there was high infant mortality, short life expectancy, frequent wars, and less developed medicine and hygiene. That is, societies had to rely on such norms. But now, thanks to technological advances, we live longer, and child mortality is much lower. These old norms aren't needed anymore for society to survive. But many religions still cling to these traditional rules and resist change. And yes, such resistance creates a serious tension. But with more safety and security, we see that more and more people become indifferent to religion. So these scholars show the condition under which religiosity collapses. And one of the main factors here is the improvement in women's rights and freedoms. And today we see that the number of non-religious and atheist women is growing, and their empowerment goes hand in hand with secularization. In this article, we see how Melanie Brewster of Columbia University and her colleague...
One thing that I have been trying to wrap my head around is how I can approach conversations with Christians, because you guys have been here for a while now. Like, I talk a lot about how I don't want to be exclusionary towards everyday Christians. I only want to fight the institution of Christianity that I think is preying upon them. But my issue with... What did he just say? What was he just talking about? I don't know. All of the research I've done deconstructing has been exhausting, just dealing with the cognitive dissonance. I know, Robert. I know it's so much. It's honestly so much to deconstruct. I say this a lot, like, I wish the peace and fulfillment and like sense of autonomy I have now, I could just transfer to people before they deconstruct, because going through it is so fucking crazy. It's so hard. It's so hard. It's exhausting. Sifting through the cognitive dissonance to be like, wait, these are conflicting beliefs. What do I actually think about this? Then you go through this process of, you pretty much have to embrace nihilism at some point. Like, wow, nothing matters. I don't matter. This doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. Right. It's so fucking hard to kind of find our way through that. And you know, it's so like, it's so funny because sometimes some of the rhetoric I'll use sounds like I'm trying to like evangelize to people. Like, I have told people like, there's a lot of people that go to this little like arts group every Monday night. There's a bunch of nice people. Like, you'll love hanging out with them. Everyone will be nice all this time. And it's kind of funny. But all the while Christian leaders are gaslighting you. Yeah. So that they can get more money, power, and influence. 100%. 100%. So like I want to call out the religious leaders and these institutions, like so actively. Like, I'm so fucking against Christianity. I'm not available for it at all. Like, when people say that they're Christian, but they just, just in a spiritual way, I'm like, that's not enough for me. I really struggle with that. I'm like, that's not far enough. I'm not available for Christianity at all in my world like that. And I really do, like, I have to kind of, I guess, check that bias when I'm talking to Christians and trying to have these conversations. But like, man, it's so insidious, and I get so frustrated all the time. So yeah, all right, let's wrap this
See
up.
that the number of non-religious and atheist women is growing, and
It's so hard talking to Christians, especially when the rest of your extended family are Christians. Yes, I agree. I'm in that boat as well. And I've just realized recently that my dad was basically deconstructing after 20 years of being a pastor. Wait, like while he was still a pastor, he stopped believing? Because I've heard that happens, that when you kind of get to a certain level of being like a pastor in a church and you stop believing, you're kind of just stuck there. And yeah, that's interesting to me. When Christian pastors like leave the faith, that's always like one of my favorite stories. Like, yeah, a lot of pastors don't believe. I've heard that too. I've heard that a lot of pastors don't believe, that they might have at first, like they might have had like the purest of intentions, but once they get to a certain point where they realize they're kind of just like in a grift, like in a con, in a, multi-level marketing scheme of Christianity, like it, I've heard that a lot of them stop believing, but they either, stay in it because they go through deconstruction, realize that nothing matters and they might as well make more money. Or there are like ex-Christian pastors like that I've seen online and stuff who are kind of speaking out against it. But he taught high school for 20 years after being a pastor for 20. My dad would say, if the church knew what I really believe, they would call me a heretic. Yowzer! Family life has been rough for me on account of all this. When I finish my deconstruction memoir, my parents are going to lose their mind. Oh, you're doing a memoir! That's amazing. I commend you for it. I'm super excited for you. Yeah, I thought about writing a memoir too. I think, you got to share your story. That's super important. You got to share your story. You got to share your perspective, because it can be so easy once we've deconstructed from religion to kind of fall into, well, I'm not trying to change anyone else's mind. That's what Christians do. Or nothing matters. So it's like, why do I need to share my story? But in reality, once you get to a point where you can just function, right? Because a lot of deconstruction was really intense and really like, you kind of have to just be in survival mode while you figure out what you think about the world, and all of that stuff. Like, once you get through all of that, then you can start to be like, okay, so how can for me, it's like, I'm an atheist now, but what does that matter if I'm not doing anything with my life? Like, I became an atheist with the intention to myself that I create my own values and morals, but like, what am I doing with that? Like, how am I helping? What am I doing? So speaking your story, sharing your story is part of rebuilding something that speaks to everyone. And I think it is so important, especially for people who have deconstructed. I'm working on 10 commandments from the book, Atheist Mind, Human Heart. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't lose a religion. I lost my entire person. Yeah, deconstruction of an entire identity. I lose my mind and my mental health and my sense of who I was. Deconstruction is not a cakewalk. A great point. However, I will say, so one of the reasons it was so goddamn challenging for me to walk away from the church was because no one else around me had. I had no guidebook. I had no blueprint for what my life could be like outside of this church. I was an oldest sibling. No one else in the private school I went to deconstructed when I was, and it was so lonely, and I was getting ostracized, and people were like blocking me on social media and all of this stuff. And it was so lonely and it was so directionless, right? Well, part of the reason it is so important for us to share our stories is so that people not just share our stories, but like show how we can live moral, fulfilled, valuable lives outside of these dogmatic religions. And the more that we show that this is possible, the more people will feel empowered to start critically examining the power structures of the organized religion they're in and determining for themselves internally that they would rather live a life of meaning that they assign for themselves instead of just having to go to church and give up a tenth of their income to be told what life is all about. So please continue talking about this, sharing this. There's kind of a balance with it. Like there is a fine line of not like reverse proselytizing, right? And that's why I say, and like on my YouTube channel a lot, like I am not here to necessarily change anyone's mind. I would love to educate people to consider new perspectives. I would love for more people, especially women, to leave these patriarchal, evangelical, fundamentalist Christian organizations. Like I would love that. But the reality is, the truth is, I am here for the version of myself 12 years ago who had no one, who had to resort to escapism behavior because I couldn't face the existentialism of not having anyone in my life and not having any direction in my life. And so we need to participate in these conversations for the versions of ourselves who didn't have anyone to look at. YouTube has been on this journey. Like I wasn't really on YouTube 12 years ago even. So I didn't even have content like this or like Twitch like this, anything really to help me on my deconstruction journey. And so that is why I'm doing this. It's not to convince people. I don't care what people believe at the end. That's why I'm a pluralist, right? That's why I think we need to build a society that's not founded on our religious beliefs in any way, shape, or form. But Christians on my YouTube channel will say in the comments all the time, why are you talking about something you don't believe in? Like, why are you attacking Christianity if you left it? And it's like, because I'm here for the version of me 12 years ago. I'm here for the people, and especially the women who don't see representation of a valuable, ethical, actively participating lifestyle outside of these, socially connected, all of the things that religion currently provides so many people. There's not a lot of representation of what that looks like outside of it. And so that's why I think it's so important. And I commend you for writing a memoir and sharing your story, whatever that looks like. So agreed. And I am with you as a fellow deconstructionist. Yes, we are here. It is happening. We are participating in this something that's gonna, turn into a better future for us all. You know what I mean? All right, let's wrap up this video, see what they got.
Their empowerment goes hand in hand with secularization. In this article, we see how Melanie Brewster of Columbia University and her colleagues note that religions, and especially Abrahamic ones like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, have tended to significantly disadvantage women. Quote, by restricting access to education, confining the passing of generational wealth or titles to men, not providing adequate reproductive services, limiting their ability to travel independently or own land, limiting employment, and inhibiting their representation in governing bodies, women were expected to bear the burden of unpaid domestic labor, child rearing, and elder care. And in this way, religious freedoms and gender equality may both be fundamental rights, but are in contradiction to one another. In other words, we see a paradox. In our societies, on the one hand, we want both religious freedom and gender equality, because these are basic rights, but on the other hand, they contradict each other. So it's unsurprising that religions would be endorsing patriarchy and sexism. Therefore, some scholars even claim that religions are instruments of gender inequality, and we have good evidence about the positive association between gender-based inequality and level of religiosity across nations. That's why the studies I talked about in this video are so important. They help us understand that the gender gaps and differences we often see are not the result of biology, but rather a social phenomenon. And it can be fixed if we fix our social structures and focus on equity.
Bye, Robert. Thank you for being here. Apostate Nate, my memoir is 18,000 words strong at the moment. Can't wait to share it when it's done. Love the title. Love the title. Book been in my heart for 15 years. Yeah, I think that I won't go off on that tangent, but that's awesome. I think I commend you. Again, 18,000 words, guess what, is 18,000 more words than I have. You got to do it. You got to keep going. You got to stick with it. Thank you again, Robert, for being here. We've had some good talks. Oh, there's Male Rights USA. Welcome. Religion does not stop gender equality. It doesn't have, religion doesn't have room for it. So you're right. In that sense, it doesn't stop gender equality. It doesn't start it either.
Especially for those who are marginalized and whose voices have been ignored or stigmatized for so long, the things may change. Of course, this entire topic is not that simple. These are complex questions and hypotheses that require verification, so don't expect easy answers. I've shared several ideas about why this gap exists, but scholars are still debating these issues. For instance, in the USSR, we kind of witnessed women emancipation, and women, especially in urban regions, were even more educated than men, and they held many high-ranking jobs. But for women, being religious, in contrast, let's say, to an American woman, was shameful. It would denigrate her status. If people find out that a woman was religious or superstitious, she could be mocked for it. She could lose her job. In other words, in the USSR, both men and women had to hide their religiosity and not their atheism. Anyway, I hope you found it interesting to learn why there are so few women among atheists. I'll also be posting a review soon about the challenges secular women faced in the past, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks to everyone.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so that was pretty legit. That was a pretty cool video. Why? Because women can't be priests, women can't go to war, either nothing inherently wrong with gender roles. If we just watch this like super great breakdown of why there aren't more atheist women, and I'm like feeling so empowered, and I'm like, yeah, you know, atheist women, we can do this. We can like have representation in atheist culture for women. And yeah, you know, Male Rights USA, you know. Okay, there's nothing inherently wrong with gender roles. All right. Hold on. Just to wrap up this video one more time. I really loved this video because I have wondered myself why there aren't as many atheist women and why I don't see a lot of like content from atheist women other than, again, Christy Burke and Britt Hartley are the only ones I've come across so far. But I think because we're all aware of so many institutions and systems and human society kind of at the end of their life cycle, like late stage capitalism, the patriarchy, religious institutions, all of these things are kind of coming together in a way that we're recognizing doesn't work for us anymore. So I'm loving all of this awareness that we need to start thinking about what's next in human evolution, like what actually makes sense for a society that keeps everyone happy and healthy, like the most important job. And part of that, I think, is letting go of these patriarchal religions. Like it is so important to shed these paradigms. I'm not available for any kind of leeway on possibly believing that a male God sent his male son and that is the only way, truth, and life. I'm not available for that. And whenever women in Christianity are ready to start seeing this and ready to start the process of deconstruction, like, girls, I am here for you. I am here for you, and I am ready to show all of us that we can live a life of meaning, connection, and purpose and empowerment that not only is possible outside of patriarchal Abrahamic religions, but for women, it's even better out here. Like, because you're not subjugating yourself in your own mind and convincing yourself, doing the mental gymnastics of justifying why the Bible talks about women in the way that it does. So am I trying to actively convert anyone? No. Or deconvert anyone? No. But women, when you are ready to leave the Christian church, girl, give me a call. That's all I'm saying. There are a lot of ex-Mormon women on YouTube. You're right. I because I wasn't raised Mormon, I forget to like look into that sometimes. And again, I'm only like just starting to really navigate the world of like atheist YouTube. So my perspective is very much like surface level, which is kind of the point. It's like, once I search atheist content, what do I get? Well, it's a bunch of white guys just like everything else. And so you kind of have to dig through to find other kinds of perspectives, which is fine. Like, I'm not necessarily attacking these content creators. It's just, again, indicative of, it's kind of funny. Like, it's kind of like so validating to know that there are more white men atheists in this country than anything else, because they've had the privilege and the leisure comparatively to deconstruct before minorities and women. So it's kind of like, it's kind of okay. But as humans, let's stop valuing institutions that value women in quantities of livestock and shekels. Yes. Yep. Agreed. Yep. It's that simple. Oh my God.